G'day there, you're watching the Aussie BIM Guru, and today I'm looking at a great new patch for Revit 2022, which is called Revit 2023. And in this...
it's not a patch, it's a whole new version.
It's a new version? What? Okay, in all seriousness, I will try to take this as seriously as possible. This is going to be a video that has a look at Revit 2023, the new version that we get that isn't backwards compatible with Revit 2022 or any other versions, pushes us up with the 4-year apart rule, and inevitably forces us to move our projects hopefully to a new version eventually, or maybe we'll just skip it and go to Revit 2024, who knows. Hopefully this video shows architects in particular what is new for them in this version. I won't really be focusing on engineering features, which is probably a good thing because there aren't too many of them to talk about. In this case, I know there are improvements to structural and electrical analytical features. I never use them myself, so I'm not going to focus on them. There are some collaboration features that will benefit everyone, but for the most part, it does seem like mainly there are features for architects in this release. I will be trying along the way to give you an idea of whether I think this version is actually worth upgrading to, if it's worth getting excited about, and of course, you know, I can't ignore this little beast next to me, the new icons. Gotta say, they are getting ripped apart on Twitter and LinkedIn. They're definitely not the prettiest things in the world, I'll be honest. I probably would just have been happy to have the same logo as before with a number on it, because that's really the hardest thing about icons in Autodesk software. Non-backwards compatible, but every icon is exactly the same. I mean, that is some terrible UX design, right? Why couldn't they just have put the friggin' number here like I did? Or just go check out Parallax's icons, for example. Anyway, a little nitpick. I wouldn't get excited about the logos. If you see anyone praising Autodesk for them, tell them they're full of it from me. But anyway, I'm going to jump in and have a look at some features, and I'll also be looking at Dynamo as well, because there are some pretty big changes to Dynamo. In my opinion, probably more exciting than most of the changes to Revit. So I will show those as well. Anyway, let's jump in. Okay, so let's begin looking at the new features in Revit 2023. Now, the first thing you'll notice is obviously the icon is different for Revit in most places, including the link Revit icon. It is amusing that the link CAD file still doesn't really reference AutoCAD, even though that's mostly the type of CAD we tend to link. But you will notice that you already have this sort of uglified little Revit logo. I'm not a huge fan of the branding. I won't spend too long talking about it. I get what they're doing. I get that they're trying to unify their vision, pull an Adobe effectively. But some of the logo choices are a little bit questionable. My favorite has to be Maya, which has an M and an Aya underneath it, so it looks like Aya, which is a bit strange. But then Arnold is, I think, A-I-N, so it's like Aaron, Aaron. So pretty amusing. Anyway, I'll start with my favorite feature in Revit 2023, and that is better support for IFC class and export guidance setup. So in this case, if I select an object, down the bottom, you're now going to find by default a few changes to the way that IFC is supported in Revit. One really good thing, first of all, is objects are automatically provided a unique ID for IFC when they're created, not when they're exported. I believe typically before this, it was always generating it during the export process, and this parameter wasn't present in the model before you did this. Now, these are actually built-in parameters, I believe, as well, so you won't find them in your project parameters. That's going to annoy some people that don't actually like IFC because now they're being given more parameters they don't want to deal with. But in my opinion, it's a step in the right direction. So as well as this, you can tell the object how to export, in this case by type, or yes, it exports, or no, it does not export to IFC. A lot of objects, often we will just be exporting by type. However, we also get the choice to specify what this object actually is at either an instance or a type level. I'm going to go to the type level of this object. And you'll find the same properties are also going to be under here as well. So you'll find default, which means yes, export the type to IFC, as well as that, what do we want to export it as? You'll notice also we have a unique ID pre-assigned to this as well. So if I click on these three buttons here, we have a new dialog. So this is effectively a enumerated breakdown of all the IFC classes and their related types in hierarchy, which is pretty great. So if I just collapse the tree, I'll see I'm mostly dealing with IFC product, element type, or spatial element type and element type, which is great. I can also switch over to the IFC 2x3 schema, but most people are probably moving on to IFC 4 quite soon, if not already. Let's say this is a roof, so I want to look for roof, and I can find IFC roof type. And then in here, we see the enum of all the options for what type of roof we classify this as. Now you're going to have some challenges here, which means you may want to treat this object as an instance, because you'll notice usually that the roof type is typically defined by the shape of the roof, and usually the shape of the roof has nothing to do with its type in Revit from a type perspective. So maybe you might do instance instead. For now, I'm just going to say, I'll just say hip roof for now. And you'll notice that automatically those two properties are assigned. The reason why I really like this is because we're dealing with an enumerated set of values, which means there's only so many options you can pick. IFC is a schema that's very unforgiving. If you get something wrong or you have a typo, it typically won't get out of Revit properly. So having enumerations is critical, especially for users that don't understand how IFC works. Having said that, I would love to see them better support an integrated method for setting up property sets or property set mapping. There are currently some ways you can do this using a mapping file or using schedules for user property sets, but they're quite complex. If you don't understand anything of what I've said there on IFC, you do need to make yourself more aware of what this is. The industry is shifting to IFC as their common data language. If you don't know anything about IFC, you should take it upon yourself to learn a bit more about it and find out why it's useful for both your company, but more importantly, your clients. Having said that, I'm still learning about it here and there. I'm not a master of it, so the channel may not touch on this too much, but it would be good to give yourself some education on this open data schema and how it can be better supported through the use of Revit. So that's probably my main feature highlight. For some people, they won't even care about that feature. So for me, it's actually my highlight. After this, the next tool that I found quite useful is if you are referencing another view on a sheet, you now have the ability to search for the view that you'd like to reference. So if I create a view and I create a call out and I reference another view, traditionally we had to just go and find that view, and this list can be huge sometimes. So adding that search tool there is great. So now I can really just focus down on it. Like a very small UX improvement, but I've wasted a lot of time as a user in the past looking for reference to other callouts. And this makes a huge change, especially given that the order isn't always in your sheet order, depending on how you name your views. So quite a nice little feature, a small one, but a nice one nonetheless. As well as this, it's worth noting that in the project browser, we can now see which views are placed on sheets and which ones aren't, which is a really handy visual auditing tool compared to switching the project browser arrangement. Another tool related to views, or more specifically viewports, is we now have the ability to replace views with other views that are able to be placed. So in this case, if I do find a view that isn't placed, so in this case, for example, approach, a 3D view. If I search for approach, so again, we can search, I can nominate a different view and it swaps it on the sheet. So rather than having to delete the viewport, place a new one, it keeps it on the sheet. It also keeps the view title type as well, which is quite handy sometimes. But I think that's a nice little feature, probably a small one, but one that will save a lot of people time when they're setting up documentation sets. Now there's a couple of new family features worth highlighting. So if I, in this case, maybe just open a family, I'll just open this chair in this case. And what I might do is I might cut a section through this chair. So by default, typically furniture in Revit, its default behavior is to project itself. So no matter where you cut that object, it's going to show you the left or the right representation currently. But you can actually intervene with this behavior now. So if I go to Edit Family, and if I'm working with specialty equipment or furniture systems, which typically aren't cuttable family categories, I now have the option to say enable cutting in views. If I reload this chair, I should now see the cut representation of it instead. Now you probably didn't really notice the difference there, but you can see we are actually cutting through the crossbar of the chair now. In some cases this will be a helpful feature because it used to be a fairly confusing aspect of using these categories of objects. Sometimes you might want them to cut, but you also want to categorize them as furniture, maybe like a bench seat, for example, in a cafeteria. Another feature that will be quite welcome by some people is the ability to include filled regions in families. Again, it seems like a silly feature we didn't have before. They have a work plane, so they behave very similarly to other objects. But in this case, we can see that this enables us to avoid having to create a nested detail item or generic annotation to support a filled region in a 3D model space. So it is actually quite a useful feature and will change the way that we build some families to make them a little bit more efficient. Now there was another feature that you might have spotted there just before that I believe is a new feature. I don't recall seeing it in Revit 2022, and it sort of relates to another feature I'm going to show as well. So we can now add dimensions in 3D on work planes, and the first feature I will show is rather than going set work plane, you can just now go straight to pick a plane, and it has a shortcut. So typically what we used to have to do is go set work plane, pick a plane, okay, and then we picked our plane. Now I can just go pick a plane or PK, and I'm going to dimension to this face. And now in 3D, without locking, I can just do an aligned dimension. So that's going to be quite helpful for some people just working in 3D that want to quickly check a dimension or a clearance or something like that. I think it's definitely a helpful feature. It's one that people have been asking for quite a while and will be quite handy, but I actually get more excited by this feature here. This will save me a few clicks and will make life a lot easier for me. Another feature we have now is the ability to tag model groups. This will be quite helpful for people that are using model groups to do apartment types and would like to tag the information of that model group. Some firms might actually be able to just get away from using rooms potentially doing this, who knows. At the very least, you can do things like tag bathroom type pods, for example. But you'll notice that if I do go to annotate, tag by category, I'm going to lock my orientation still. I can now actually tag the model group. It will prompt me to load in a tag for model groups, but this is now very much an option that I don't believe we had before, which is quite nice. And as people will know, in Revit 2022, they did add the option to add shared parameters to model groups as well. Another tool that we have that I don't use a great deal, I'll be honest, is the ability to displace objects in 2D views, not just 3D views. So now I should be able to enable the displace elements option when I'm in a 2D view, and as you know, this will not actually have an impact on any object in another view. It only affects it in that specific view. So that's quite a handy little feature for some people, especially in documentation. I personally probably won't use it a great deal, but there it is anyway. There's another feature in materials. So if we go to manage materials, we now have the option to duplicate a material with new assets. So if I duplicate the material and assets, I'll get a new copy of this Saturn appearance asset, and I'll also get a duplicated copy of the shared assets. Now there is a problem with this. So in this case, you can see I've actually duplicated the physical and the thermal property as well. And then one of the problems is a lot of the time people just don't change these properties. They leave them on the material, even though they're not using them. Very quickly, people are going to accidentally create a lot of copies of these assets when really all they care about is the appearance. So I don't know if I like this feature too much. Sort of like the duplicate sheet option they added in 2022. All I saw was just a whole bunch of mess that was about to come into the model. So I am sort of on the fence about this one. And these aren't going to be purgeable assets either, because they're going to be in use on a material that's in use as well. So I'm on the fence about that one. I wish it was just duplicate with appearance asset, or duplicate with all assets, or just duplicate with the same assets. Because in this case, you can still do the traditional duplicate without duplicating the assets as well. So I'm sort of on the fence about that one. Apparently as well, and I don't believe I can demonstrate it here, but I believe you can now also use cloud-based texture paths if you do want to keep your material library up in the cloud. As well as this, there is a new feature which I can't really show because I don't have a project to show it in, but there is going to be a cloud-based parameter storage service, to my knowledge, on BIM 360. I'm curious how it's going to work with the API for working with parameters in Dynamo and add-ins. Hopefully it still supports an API method, so we do have the ability to source those parameters when we're doing automation workflows on objects not in the cloud, in the model specifically. But I'm intrigued to see how firms sort of take advantage of that feature as well. There's also some tools coming up called Power Automate, which from what I understand are going to be sort of like scripts or add-ins to some degree that can do things with a lot of data interoperability between files. I'm curious to see what they do with it, but definitely keep an eye on Power Automate. I'm sure there'll be some webinars on it. Personally, I use heaps of Dynamo and add-ins, so I probably won't have a great deal of use for it myself. but it could be a good sort of shortcut for people that don't know much about those features. The final feature in Revit, yep, final that I'm showing you, so not many, is if you do add points to a floor, you will notice that the points are a lot easier to spot now. They're this sort of light blue color, but as well as that, I can tell edges to be split lines instead of division lines. I'm not sure if they have different graphics for them. Folding edges and split lines, yes, so I could actually hide some lines but not others, which might be helpful when you're trying to show certain paving pieces, but not all of them. I'm sure landscapers will enjoy that feature, but I guess a small feature nonetheless. But now I guess we've seen some of the Revit features. I'm now going to jump over to Dynamo instead and see what's new there. So I'm in Dynamo here, and immediately you'll probably notice it looks a little bit different. You can see on the top ribbon, the font has been standardized, and as well as this, everything's just looking a little bit cleaner, a little bit sharper. Once we actually open a script, we're going to see the difference. I might just make a new script first of all, and first of all, you'll notice that the library is a lot cleaner. Whilst you still can support custom packages, you're not typically going to see icons until you get right down to the bottom of a tree. I think this is probably a good decision because it makes it much more clear which level of a tree you're working at, even though there's a little bit of identity sort of lost at the top level of Dynamo itself. But you will typically find very similar nodes and breakdowns to what you usually had before. There are going to be a couple of new nodes in here, I'm sure, to help people out. But for the most part, all the classic ones that you know and love are still here. We have pretty much all the same areas that we had in the previous version of Dynamo. They still support integrations and extensions. So we can see, first of all, the documentation browser, which is quite handy. So if I do have a node, I believe the documentation browser sometimes will help. Only for errors, it looks like in this case, but I guess that's still quite useful. If I go to help here, there we go. So you can call on information about nodes, which is quite useful. But you'll also notice straight away, everything's looking pretty different. We have a dark mode, as I might call it, that gives Dynamo more of a identity and does create a good level of contrast between all the other objects, between the canvas and the surrounding elements. I do think it looks a lot better. There are some changes they've also made to the way some nodes look. So I think default inputs by default are blue, and required inputs have this little tab next to them, which I think is quite nice. And there's just various improvements to some of the options you have. If I group objects, the groups look much better. They now have a title, and you can add a description, which I think is brilliant. You can also make groups into clusters, which is very interesting. So inside the group, there are actually things still going on, but you just see the outside of that group, which is pretty interesting. I think its size might be based on the node layout. Yeah, so you can't really condense your script, but you can sort of hide the complexity of what's going on behind the scenes, which is quite interesting. Sort of like building a cluster in Grasshopper. I do recommend to the Dynamo team that they maybe consider the ability to condense this group. I'm not sure if we have the ability to condense it. It doesn't look like it, but that might be an interesting feature as well. So that's some of the basics. Let's have a look at some of the changes that they've made looking at a specific script. So I'm just going to open up a script here to bulk revision. Now I have just literally opened an old Dynamo script in this particular version. You'll notice straight away that a lot of the nodes are a lot bigger. So you're immediately going to find you might have to do a little bit of cleanup of your scripts, which is a little bit frustrating, but still at the same time, it is what it is. You'll notice that you start to see where nodes are sort of coming from, either custom packages, code blocks, various elements of the Revit browser. So I do find that really helps people start to graphically navigate what's going on. So obviously it's great. Like, there are some really good arguments for all the decisions they've made, and I'm quite excited to see what they do with it. As well as this, we still have support for custom nodes, so they pretty much look the same, except for obviously the real estate issues. I'm using IronPython 2, so this is a really important thing for custom package developers to understand. We obviously have IronPython 2, CPython 3. However, if you don't have the IronPython package installed with the right version for your package to use, which in my experience is just one typical version, you're not actually going to be able to run any of those old custom packages. I actually see this as a really big problem because a lot of custom package managers are not going to update their package
either because they're no longer working on them, or because they don't have the time, or they don't really see the point in making two separate versions of their package to support a product that should really be multi-version in how it works. So as a result, I actually did have to install this package before any of the custom nodes in data shapes or crumple worked. So you will find that is probably a problem. Now, I would argue if Autodesk is that happy to package the generative design package automatically into Dynamo, why not just put the Dynamo IronPython package in there as well? It doesn't do anyone any harm, in my opinion. There's probably some technical reasons why they don't want to. Maybe it uses more memory, I'm not quite sure. But at the same time, it's going to be a huge pain for a while. Currently, the pain that we're dealing with in Dynamo is the import Excel node not working because of Windows updates, and I see at least one topic every week on the forums about this. This is going to trigger at least a topic every week, in my opinion. Probably way more. Why doesn't my package work? Why doesn't my node work? It's going to happen, and it's going to be a problem once people reach this version. So definitely suggesting to the developers of Dynamo to think about any way to do this, minus telling people to get over IronPython. You know, a lot of people used it, and it's still going to be around. I mean, it's good that you gave us this package, yes, but why not just make it part of the default setup? That would be ideal. Now, one thing actually before I leave this is another really great feature that they've added is a documentation browser and also another browser. So if I go to extensions, graph properties is really great. So you can add descriptions, you can add an icon, obviously a bit of a silly icon here in a homage to John Pearson and the Monocle package. But in this case, you can say who made it. And the best thing is you can add a help URL, which could be like your SharePoint or a wiki that guides them how to run the script. And you can also add custom fields to the description of this script as well, which is actually going to read through in Dynamo Player, which is awesome. So there's probably a lot of little additions to Dynamo beyond this. I'm probably just going to stop there for Dynamo itself and just show you Dynamo Player. I think already I've spent more time on Dynamo than Revit. Wow. So let's boot up Dynamo Player. Now I have found one bug with a custom node I use quite often in Dynamo for Dynamo Player, which is interesting. I will show it, but you can see straight away descriptions, script names, and icons really change the way things look. As well as this, you can create simplified versions, so it's a little bit clearer. Now, one really cool feature is they've added extra folders. I can add multiple locations, in this case on my server, so I can add more places to get scripts from, and I can toggle between those locations. I mean, how good is that? That is definitely a feature that a lot of people are going to like. So if I go to, say, maybe I'll go to just a set of scripts that I have somewhere. I just want to add one extra folder. And this is an awesome feature. Like, I really do have to commend people. Let's just add my Nonica scripts. So I'll add these two, close this, and now I have two places to draw on scripts from. So I can pick between different sets of tools from different folders, which is a game changer. It would be great to see this worked back into older versions of Dynamo because it's much needed, and it makes this a much more fun experience for the user. Now I can still run my scripts. I can also hover over a script to see information about it, such as a help. So now it opens that URL that I provided it with. So that's really awesome for companies that do use wikis. I think that's going to be great. So let's just run one warning first. I'll just run the isolate warning script. So I have to press play. It's going to run the script like normal. In this case, it's eventually going to give me a dialog saying, you know, there are 7 elements. Do I want to isolate them? Yes, I do. And there they are. And I can see that my run is now complete and it worked. So it's a much more friendly experience. Now I did find this script actually does cause a bug with Dynamo Player, so I am going to show it. The end of this script is going to be a UI generated through a pop-up message. So it seems like if I end on one of these, it usually, it bugs out Dynamo Player. So it seems like that node somehow disables all the scripts in Dynamo Player. So hopefully that helps the developers seeing that. But in this case, I've got to say Dynamo Player for the most part, really good work. Dynamo, interesting update. It will be great to see it rolled back into Dynamo in older versions, at least in 2022, because a lot of people are still using that version. But at the same time, I get that you guys only have so many hours in the day to do things. Must say, Dynamo for me was a much bigger highlight than Revit in this case, but hopefully the IFC features are an indication of things to come. So that's actually all the features I have to show you. Probably record time compared to my old videos, but there we go.
So there we go, another year, another Revit. Must say, overall, a little bit disappointed in this release. I'm definitely probably not going to be working in Revit 2023 very much. There's not many features that will bring me up to this version. A lot of us are still working in old builds, and it does always lend the question, is the version per year really a manageable strategy for anyone but the shareholders of Autodesk who get all excited when there's a new sexy version with a new sort of ugly logo. So I'm a bit on the fence with this one. I definitely, still use Revit a lot for my day-to-day work, but that doesn't mean that I don't have the ability to criticize it quite openly and arguably fairly as well. I do think that the beast is slowing down a lot in terms of what's changing and what's improving, but it is good to see them at least starting to make forays into making the IFC enabling experience a lot easier for users that almost have no idea how the system works. Building in some of those enumerated options in there is probably a step in the right direction because most people just won't have the time to learn the full IFC schema. It'd be good to see them enable other ways to manage property sets in a enumerated fashion where possible, but at the same time, if you are looking to learn more about that, I highly recommend checking out the BIM Me Up channel, which I will put a URL for just below here at this point, hopefully. If I forget, it'll be in the description. But I guess moving on, I am excited to see the Dynamo changes, but I am disappointed to see that we're probably not going to get them in older builds. Also, the deprecation of IronPython 2, in my opinion, is going to be a pretty big problem. I feel like we're going to see a lot of questions on the forums about it, and for the most part, users are going to really struggle to understand how to make that work. How about we just don't include generative design and we just include IronPython? In my opinion, people get much more excited by the second one than the first one. Sorry to the team at generative design. But anyway, I guess there isn't quite that many features in here to get me excited. I know there's some coming up that I can't talk about that would have been good to show, but I guess they're not ready for 2023. So maybe there'll be a patch, I don't know, maybe there'll be a Revit 2024. Let's hope they come a bit before that. There are a few cloud features that I'm sure will change some things about how we work on BIM 360. So it'll be good to see how people take advantage of things like cloud-based parameters. But yeah, gotta say, it feels a little bit underwhelming this time around. Oh well. Anyway, having said that, if you think that, I've missed some features or you just want to talk about it, down below, let me know. I mean, what do you think of the new icons? Do you think they actually work? In my opinion, they don't, which is why I've put numbers on the bottom of all my icons, so they actually help us understand what version we're using. But I guess I'm interested to see what other people think. I'm trying not to just be a fanboy in this case. If you do see people going nuts about the new icon, in my opinion, they're just fanboys, fangirls, they're not genuine. So, feel free to question them if you come across them. But yeah, hopefully some people find this release useful, but to be honest, I'm just skipping to 24 at this point if it's worth it. If not, I'm hanging back in 22 because really that was the only version I found I really had some new features I could take advantage of in. Anyway, bummer. Yeah. Anyway, if you're not already following and subscribing, feel free to do so. And I look forward to seeing you in future videos like this one and some tutorials that might be using this version of Revit eventually as well. Anyway, thanks. Take care. Bye.